We accept the love we think we deserve. This quote, while originating from a work of fiction, reflects a deep psychological reality that applies to many human relationships. When people grow up in environments where love is inconsistent, conditional, or altogether absent, they often internalize the belief that affection must be earned, chased, or proven. As a result, they become highly sensitive to even the smallest signs of emotional interest, often interpreting basic attention as a sign of love. This is not because they are irrational, but because they have been conditioned to respond that way through emotional experience. In psychology, we understand that the brain does not interpret attention and love as separate things when emotional needs are unresolved. Attention often comes first, and when it is paired with relief from loneliness, fear, or self-doubt, it can be mistaken for something deeper. The person receiving the attention starts to feel valued, even if the attention is inconsistent or lacking true emotional depth. This is not love, it is a chemical reaction in the brain, driven by the desire to feel connected, seen, and safe. When a person is deprived of emotional nourishment for long enough, even the smallest signal of recognition can feel profound. But what feels profound is not always meaningful. The brain's reward system plays a major role in this misunderstanding. When someone responds to you, compliments you, or simply gives you their time, your brain rewards the experience with a burst of dopamine. This chemical reaction makes you feel good, so you begin to associate that person with comfort. Even if their behavior is inconsistent or their intentions are unclear, you are not bonding with them because of who they are. You are bonding because of how they make you feel in the moment. The result is an emotional attachment that is not grounded in mutual understanding, shared values, or true intimacy. It is grounded in psychological relief. Dark psychology examines how these emotional patterns can be used to manipulate people. When someone knows that you equate attention with love, they can use that knowledge to influence you. They do not need to be emotionally invested. They only need to give you just enough stimulation to trigger your hope. They may not intend to form a real relationship, but their occasional interest keeps you emotionally attached. That interest might take the form of a late-night message, a compliment, or a display of concern. But these gestures do not reflect a commitment. They reflect awareness of what keeps you emotionally responsive. The person receiving this attention often feels confused. One moment they feel important, the next they feel ignored. They begin to invest more energy into the connection, not because it is fulfilling, but because it is unpredictable. Unpredictable attention causes the brain to stay alert. It creates emotional tension, which the person mistakes for passion. But passion built on anxiety is not sustainable. It is emotionally exhausting. Over time, this dynamic creates a cycle where the individual constantly seeks reassurance from someone who has never provided real security. This is where the confusion between love and attention becomes most harmful. The person believes they are in love, but they are actually caught in a loop of emotional craving and momentary relief. The relationship lacks the qualities that define genuine love, such as emotional safety, consistency, and mutual care. Instead, it is built on response and reaction. The person is not building a relationship with a whole person. They are responding to a pattern of intermittent rewards. Many people do not recognize when this is happening because the attention feels real. It feels familiar. It matches what they have come to believe love should look like. But just because something feels familiar does not mean it is healthy. Familiarity is not the same as truth. It is often a reflection of past wounds, not present reality. When someone gives you attention during a moment of vulnerability, your brain interprets it as love because that is what it wants to believe. That belief can be strong enough to override facts, history, and even logic. This video will examine how attention becomes confused with love, why the brain accepts this confusion, and how dark psychology uses it to create emotional dependency. It will show you how love is not a feeling created by brief moments of recognition, but a process of ongoing emotional investment and truth. But before you can see that clearly, you must be willing to look at the difference between what feels good and what is actually good for you. There is a psychological reason why even intelligent people repeatedly fall into this confusion, and once you see it, you will not be able to unsee it. From early childhood, the human mind begins forming associations between external responses and internal worth. A child who is praised for smiling learns to smile more. A child who is ignored when crying begins to suppress emotion. The foundation of self-perception becomes tied to how others respond. When this learning is carried into adolescence and adulthood, it evolves into a silent rule. If someone pays attention to me, I must be worthy of affection. That rule becomes the seed of one of the most common lies in modern emotional life. It convinces people that attention equals care, that care equals love. This is not an emotional misunderstanding. This is a structured psychological illusion. Dark psychology identifies this illusion as a product of emotional reinforcement. When an individual receives attention, the brain interprets it as a reward. Dopamine is released. The brain becomes conditioned to seek the behavior that produces that reward. It is not the person that becomes addictive. It is the feeling produced by being noticed. That feeling is misinterpreted as love because the emotional brain does not distinguish between real affection and intermittent reinforcement. The result is a belief system that cannot recognize the absence of genuine emotional investment. It only registers the presence of stimuli. The error is reinforced socially. Movies, music, and cultural scripts constantly promote the idea that someone looking at you, texting you, reacting to you, or complimenting you is expressing love. This is not a representation of intimacy. It is a dramatization of access. Access to someone's words, time, or physical presence does not indicate emotional security. It does not reflect sacrifice, trust, vulnerability, or shared emotional growth. It reflects proximity, but proximity is not devotion. It is logistical convenience. The confusion is rarely questioned. People grow up with the idea that affection is loud, immediate, and visible. If someone shows up when you are hurting, they must care. If someone pays attention when you feel ignored, they must be special. These are patterns created by emotional need, not rational thought. What dark psychology exposes is that these patterns are not merely naive. They are exploitable, because anything that can be conditioned can be controlled, and anyone who responds predictably to attention becomes vulnerable to manipulation. The false belief gains strength because it is emotionally comforting. It is easier to believe that someone likes you because they reply quickly than it is to question whether their presence is strategic. It is more satisfying to interpret compliments as love than it is to explore whether the person has ever shown consistent care during moments of emotional conflict. Human psychology favors the immediate reward over long-term evidence. It favors the visible over the invisible. This creates a blindness toward authenticity, and that blindness is not emotional, it is cognitive. Attention feels like love because it simulates the conditions the brain associates with being valued. When someone responds to your message, your brain activates the same neural pathways used when receiving positive social feedback. This is not a metaphor, it is an observable reaction. Over time, the mind equates that attention with security, but that security is synthetic. It does not emerge from shared emotional history. It is not built on mutual understanding. It is a simulation. It is a performance. The belief that attention equals love is not the result of irrational thinking. It is the result of adaptive behavior formed under emotional scarcity. People who grow up without consistent emotional support often learn to find meaning in fragments. A text becomes a lifeline. A compliment becomes identity. These small moments feel large, not because they are meaningful, but because the absence of meaning elsewhere makes them appear significant. This is not romantic attachment. This is emotional compensation. People believe that attention is love because they have never been taught. The difference: they have not experienced love that is quiet, stable, and consistent. They have only felt the high of being noticed and the pain of being ignored. So they chase what stimulates, not what sustains. This is not love. This is reaction. When attention is mistaken for love, the individual becomes dependent on being seen in order to feel alive. But feeling alive in someone else's gaze is not the same as being emotionally connected. It is the illusion of worth, dependent on external perception, and illusions, once believed, become the architecture of emotional suffering. No psychological trap is more persistent than the belief that being noticed means being loved. The desire for attention is not a superficial preference. It is a psychological mechanism rooted in survival. In early developmental stages, human infants rely entirely on the gaze, tone, and presence of caregivers to regulate emotion and construct a sense of self. When a baby cries and is soothed, the brain learns that expression leads to connection. When that cry is ignored, the brain absorbs a very different message. Expression leads to abandonment. Over time, this unresolved emotional experience does not vanish. It becomes embedded in the adult psyche as an unconscious craving for affirmation. Dark psychology does not view attention-seeking as mere neediness. It identifies it as a form of emotional withdrawal, a dependency shaped by repeated scarcity. Individuals who lacked consistent emotional attunement during childhood often grow up mistaking intensity for intimacy. They learn that if someone finally pays attention to them, that attention must be meaningful. But the truth is, what feels meaningful is often just unfamiliar. The sudden presence of validation creates a spike in dopamine, which the brain rapidly associates with the person delivering it. This association is not based on love, it is based on chemical reward. The brain is designed to seek patterns. When attention provides emotional relief, the brain catalogs that experience as pleasurable. It begins to crave similar interactions. This is not a metaphor, it is neurochemical conditioning. The release of dopamine reinforces the behavior that preceded it. In relationships, this can result in a dangerous pattern. Someone responds to your message. You feel significant. The brain marks that moment. When it happens again, the emotional impact multiplies. Eventually, your sense of connection is no longer based on shared values, mutual vulnerability, or emotional investment. It is based on whether or not the other person responds when you feel empty. This is how psychological addiction to attention is formed. It is not dramatic, it is subtle. Most people do not recognize when it begins. They only recognize the pain of its absence. When the person they crave becomes unavailable, they feel rejected, but that rejection is not rooted in betrayal. It is rooted in withdrawal. The body responds with anxiety, preoccupation, and obsessive thought. This is not heartbreak, it is dependency. Dark psychology reveals how manipulative individuals recognize these patterns in others. They use intermittent reinforcement to maintain control. By giving attention sporadically, they condition the other person to crave it more. This technique has been studied in behavioral psychology for decades. The same method used to train animals to press a lever for a food pellet is used consciously or unconsciously in many human relationships. Love bombing, sudden silence, and emotional unpredictability are not just signs of emotional immaturity. They are tools of manipulation. Attachment theory supports this mechanism. Individuals with anxious attachment styles often interpret inconsistent attention as a challenge to be won. They try harder, they give more. They lose themselves in the pursuit of consistency. But consistency is not coming because the attention they are chasing was never rooted in care. It was a mechanism designed to trigger their unmet emotional needs. These needs were never met in childhood, and the adult mind is now seeking completion through repetition. Validation seeking is another aspect of this craving. Many individuals derive their self-worth from how others react to them. Compliments, likes, texts, and conversations are not just interactions, they are measurements. If someone responds quickly, it feels like proof of value. If they respond slowly, it feels like rejection. This creates emotional volatility. The person becomes dependent on external feedback for internal stability. This is not connection, it is performance. People who experience childhood emotional neglect often confuse visibility with love. Because they were never truly seen for who they were, they now chase anyone who notices them. But being seen is not the same as being known. A stranger can observe you. A manipulator can study you. A narcissist can mirror you. None of these acts involve love. They involve attention. And attention, when received by someone emotionally starved, feels like salvation. It is not. It is stimulation. The craving for attention is not shallow. It is complex. It is built from years of unmet needs, ignored emotions, and internalized abandonment. It is reinforced by digital culture, where instant feedback replaces emotional intimacy. It is manipulated by those who understand how to use it as leverage, and it is misunderstood by those who experience it, because it feels so much like love. But it is not love. It is a chemical echo, a psychological reflex, a survival response. It looks like connection. It feels like value. But it is only a reaction to absence. And the more you chase it, the more you confirm the lie that love must be earned by being noticed. Human perception is not passive. The mind does not record reality like a camera. It interprets it. When it comes to emotional experiences, especially those rooted in intimacy, the interpretation is rarely neutral. It is shaped by memory, trauma, bias, and unmet psychological needs. This is why attention can so easily be misread as affection. Not because it is, but because the brain wants it to be. This misreading is not accidental. It is neurologically and psychologically constructed. It is the consequence of reward pathways that have been shaped by inconsistent reinforcement and emotional deprivation. In dark psychology, this is referred to as interpretive distortion, a cognitive process where the brain assigns meaning to a stimulus based not on reality but on desire. When someone pays attention to you, your brain immediately processes it through the lens of past experiences. If you have lived without consistent emotional support, attention feels rare. Rarity creates value, and perceived value creates emotional attachment. That attachment is not built on knowledge of the other person. It is built on what they make you feel. More specifically, what your brain assumes they mean. This assumption becomes belief. That belief becomes emotional investment. But the entire structure is founded on a reaction, not a relationship. This is why people fall in love with fantasies, not because they are naive, but because the brain prefers closure. When attention is given and emotional need is triggered, the brain fills in the missing pieces. It constructs a narrative around the person. This narrative is not based on data, it is based on projection. The brain takes what it wants to feel and assigns it to whoever creates that feeling. It does not check for consistency, emotional maturity, or shared values. It checks for intensity, and intensity, in the absence of awareness, is often confused with intimacy. Neuroscientific research confirms that the same brain regions activated during drug addiction are activated during romantic attraction. The ventral tegmental area, a part of the brain responsible for reward processing, becomes hyperactive. Dopamine is released. The experience of being seen, noticed, or validated becomes a chemical reward. This reward then reinforces the behavior that produced it. If someone texts you first, if they react quickly, if they use affectionate words, your brain marks those behaviors as valuable. It does not distinguish between real love and emotional bait. It only tracks the pleasure. This is the basis of psychological projection. A person receives attention, feels good, and assumes that the person who provided it must have loving intentions. That assumption is then projected onto the relationship. The other person becomes a carrier of meaning, not because they have shown love, but because they have triggered a response. This is not romantic, it is mechanical, it is predictable, and it is dangerous. Dark psychology explores how this mechanism is used deliberately by manipulators. By identifying what makes someone feel seen, a manipulator can reproduce those behaviors to create artificial connection. This is commonly seen in a tactic called mirroring. The manipulator reflects the other person's interests, emotions, and language patterns to simulate similarity. This simulation triggers recognition. Recognition triggers trust. But that trust is not earned. It is manufactured. Over time, the brain begins to rely on these external stimuli for emotional regulation. If attention is received, anxiety lowers. If it is withheld, anxiety spikes. This is not a healthy emotional bond. It is a form of intermittent reinforcement. It conditions the person to seek approval, not connection, to avoid abandonment, not build intimacy. The person becomes focused on maintaining the source of attention, rather than evaluating its authenticity. This leads to over-functioning, emotional over-investment, and boundary erosion. False intimacy arises when the emotional intensity is mistaken for depth. Just because someone makes you feel deeply does not mean they understand you. Just because someone engages with you frequently does not mean they care about your well-being. The illusion of love is maintained by the repetition of pleasurable stimuli. The mind, desperate to avoid emotional discomfort, clings to those stimuli and labels them as affection. In reality, attention is a moment. Love is a process. Attention is about being noticed. Love is about being known. Attention can be given without understanding. Love cannot exist without it. When the brain confuses these two, the result is emotional chaos. People begin to chase people who are not safe. They ignore people who are consistent. They prioritize the ones who trigger their chemistry, rather than the ones who nourish their peace. This confusion is not romantic. It is destructive. It perpetuates cycles of longing, disillusionment, and emotional fatigue. It creates relationships that begin with fireworks and end in silence. It convinces people that suffering is proof of depth, that waiting is a sign of loyalty, that pain is a measure of love. None of these are true. When the brain misinterprets attention as love, it builds a relationship with a fantasy. That fantasy is not sustainable. It cannot respond, grow, or heal. It can only fade, and when it does, the emotional cost is not just disappointment. It is identity loss, because the person was not just in love with another. They were in love with who they thought they were when they were being noticed. Modern society does not teach emotional awareness. It teaches emotional performance. From the earliest years, people are exposed to scripts that define what love should look like. These scripts are not based on psychological truth. They are shaped by commercial storytelling, cultural repetition, and visual symbolism. Romantic myths are embedded in songs, advertisements, novels, and films. These myths reward dramatic gestures, obsessive behaviors, and overwhelming emotions. They rarely reward communication, stability, or psychological safety. As a result, the definition of love becomes a performance of intensity, not an understanding of depth. Dark psychology identifies this conditioning as a social cognitive distortion. It explains how repeated exposure to fantasy creates false expectations. When people are taught that love must be loud to be real, they become blind to subtlety. They begin to believe that passion is more important than compatibility, that pursuit is more important than presence, and that suffering is a sign of authenticity. These beliefs are not simply naive, they are culturally engineered. They serve industries that profit from longing, insecurity, and unresolved attachment. When individuals cannot recognize genuine love, they continue consuming representations of it. They spend money, time, and emotional energy chasing validation through images. Social media has intensified this distortion. It has transformed connection into performance, presence into exposure. Platforms reward visibility. They reward responsiveness. They measure value in metrics. When someone likes your post, reacts to your story, or sends a message, it feels personal, but it is not personal. It is algorithmic. The illusion of attention is created by design. Notifications simulate importance. Filters simulate perfection. Interactions are shaped by predictive systems, not emotional truth. This does not prevent people from feeling, it amplifies their emotional reactivity. Parasocial relationships are a direct result of this amplification. A person can become emotionally invested in someone they do not know, not because the connection is real, but because the brain cannot distinguish between digital attention and personal validation. When someone views your content, compliments your appearance, or sends you a message, Your emotional brain processes it as relational, but there is no relationship. There is only response. That response triggers pleasure. That pleasure creates attachment, and that attachment leads to confusion. Dating culture has also absorbed this distortion. Swiping left or right is not a decision of compatibility. It is a decision of visual recognition and reflex. Many people treat connection as a strategy. They text not to build a bond, but to maintain control. They compliment not to affirm your soul, but to gauge your reaction. Dark psychology explores how these behaviors are not anomalies. They are normalized. When manipulation becomes a trend, authenticity becomes rare. When rare becomes unfamiliar, people begin to mistrust sincerity. This is not a cynical observation. It is a documented shift in interpersonal behavior. The consequences are measurable. Studies have shown that people who consume large amounts of romantic media report lower relationship satisfaction. They experience greater emotional instability and higher relational anxiety. This is not due to exposure alone. It is due to the internalized standards that become impossible to meet. When someone expects cinematic gestures, ordinary affection feels empty. When someone expects constant excitement, emotional consistency feels boring. This does not reflect emotional reality. It reflects cognitive distortion. Philosophy has also addressed this illusion. Thinkers such as Søren Kierkegaard and Erich Fromm warned against confusing emotional stimulation with love. Fromm stated that real love is not something passive. It is an active process involving care, responsibility, respect, and knowledge. These components cannot be performed. They must be lived. In contrast, society rewards appearance. It promotes the image of love without requiring the substance. This gap between image and reality creates emotional confusion. That confusion is not harmless. It is existential. The rise of influencer culture has further blurred the line between authenticity and simulation. When individuals curate every aspect of their romantic life for an audience, the experience becomes externalized. People begin to mimic what they see, rather than explore what they feel. They shape their relationships to match a story. That story is not private. It is performed. This performance is rewarded with likes, validation, and perceived worth. But it is fragile. When the performance fails, the identity collapses. This collapse is not just relational, it is psychological. In this environment, it becomes increasingly difficult to recognize real love. Not because it does not exist, but because it is drowned in noise. Real love is quiet. It is not designed to entertain. It does not always photograph well. It is built in the spaces between attention, not in the spotlight. People who expect love to always feel exciting will leave when it begins to feel stable. But stability is not the absence of love. It is the foundation of it. The myth that attention is proof of love survives because it is easy to reproduce. It does not require depth, time, or sacrifice. It only requires presence and reaction. But presence without emotional engagement is not love, and reaction without understanding is not connection. It is data, it is noise, it is simulation. No society that profits from illusion will teach you how to recognize the truth. In controlled environments, attention can be a method of learning. In relationships, attention can be a weapon. Not every person who gives you attention intends to build a connection. Some intend to build control. Dark psychology focuses on this exact manipulation, the deliberate use of emotional stimuli to influence perception, behavior, and self-worth. The person who gives you attention is not always showing love. They may be managing your emotions. They may be exploiting your response patterns. They may be studying your reactions to calibrate the next move. This is not paranoia. This is psychological warfare executed in emotional language. Manipulators often do not appear malicious. In fact, they appear intensely interested. They ask deep questions. They remember details. They respond quickly. They praise often. This stage is called love bombing. It is a psychological tactic where a person overwhelms another with affection, flattery, and constant contact. The intention is not connection, it is dependency. The recipient becomes emotionally bonded before any real intimacy has formed. That bond is not mutual, it is strategic. The manipulator has secured emotional investment without offering authenticity. Once dependency is established, the attention becomes inconsistent. The praise slows down, the responses become delayed, the behavior becomes unpredictable. This is not carelessness, it is calculated. Intermittent reinforcement is one of the most powerful psychological tools for conditioning behavior. When attention becomes inconsistent, the emotional brain becomes hyper-focused. The person begins to work harder to regain the original stimulation. They adjust their behavior, they suppress their concerns, they compromise their boundaries. This is not compromise, it is control. The manipulator knows what they are doing. They withhold to create desire, they withdraw to create fear. Then, at carefully chosen moments, they return with affection. This affection is not sincere, it is a reset. It is designed to remind the recipient of what they once felt and to make them question whether the loss was their fault. The cycle repeats: high affection, sudden distance, unexpected kindness, emotional confusion. The brain cannot stabilize, and when the brain cannot stabilize, it becomes suggestible. It begins to adapt, not to truth, but to survival. This is where trauma bonding begins. Trauma bonding occurs when emotional pain is paired with moments of relief, creating a psychological attachment to the source of both. The person becomes addicted to the one who hurts them because the same person offers temporary safety. That safety is not real. It is a psychological illusion. The manipulator is not creating safety. They are creating relief from the pain they caused. That relief is then interpreted as love, but it is not love. It is emotional dependence, created by a system of manipulation. Dark psychology shows that this pattern is not exclusive to romantic relationships. It occurs in friendships, families, workplaces, and communities. Wherever there is a power imbalance and emotional vulnerability, the misuse of attention can occur. People who need approval become the easiest targets. They do not question inconsistency. They explain it away. They blame themselves. They justify mistreatment because the pain of losing attention feels worse than the pain of being controlled. Narcissistic personalities often exploit this mechanism. Narcissists use attention to create admiration, then withdraw to provoke insecurity. They mirror your values, reflect your desires, and simulate connection. But they do not connect. They collect, they gather admiration, compliance, and loyalty, not for mutual growth, but for emotional supply. When they no longer need the attention to control, they discard the relationship. The discard is not always physical, it can be emotional. Silent withdrawal, cold responses, passive aggression. These behaviors are not signs of confusion, they are expressions of dominance. In this dynamic, attention is not given freely, it is earned through compliance. The more you submit, the more they reward. The more you question, the more they punish. This is not miscommunication, this is behavioral conditioning. You are not in a relationship, you are in a system. That system trains you to betray your instincts, to doubt your reality, and to believe that love is something you must chase. But real love does not need to be earned through exhaustion. It does not punish inquiry. It does not disappear when challenged. Psychological abuse rarely begins with insults. It begins with attention. It begins with intense eye contact, with immediate availability, with the feeling of being seen. That feeling creates trust. That trust is exploited, not through violence, but through silence, not through cruelty, but through emotional volatility. The person begins to shape their behavior around the approval of someone who never intended to understand them. They lose autonomy, they lose clarity, they lose self. The dangerous truth is this: the more emotionally deprived someone has been, the more powerful attention feels, and the more powerful it feels, the easier it is to manipulate. Manipulators do not look for strong people to break. They look for empty spaces to fill. Then they remove the source of comfort and watch the desperation grow. That desperation is not love, it is psychological captivity masked as affection. Control that feels like care is the most effective deception in emotional abuse. It is difficult to distinguish love from attention when the emotional brain is active and the rational mind is silenced. People do not fall into confusion by accident. They are led by repetition, emotional deprivation, and internal patterns that are never questioned. Recognizing that something is not love begins with redefining what love is. Love is not urgency. Love is not reaction. Love is not the sudden warmth that follows cold distance. It is not the relief that arrives after tension. Love is not intensity that burns. Love is consistency that remains. Dark psychology provides language for emotional misinterpretation. What often appears as affection is sometimes only attention that has been strategically delivered. To identify the difference, one must study the behavior beyond the moment. Ask not whether someone compliments you. Ask whether their presence remains when you are no longer easy to please. Real love does not disappear when you are anxious, insecure, or not performing your best. Attention will, because attention is conditional. Love is not. The clearest sign that something is not love is the absence of security. When you feel emotionally unstable in someone's presence, when your worth feels determined by how they respond to you, you are not in love. You are in psychological imbalance. That imbalance is not caused by affection. It is caused by inconsistency. Inconsistent attention creates a pattern of emotional highs and lows. That pattern does not produce love. It produces addiction. People who mistake attention for love often ignore important markers of emotional health. They tolerate disrespect, justify manipulation, and explain away neglect. They believe that conflict is a sign of passion. They believe that jealousy is a measure of care. They believe that control is a form of protection. These beliefs are not romantic. They are symptoms of unhealed psychological wounds. The wound responds to attention like thirst responds to water, without checking if the source is clean. Another indicator is the presence of fear. If you are afraid to speak your mind, afraid to ask questions, afraid to express doubt, you are not in a safe relationship. You are in a dynamic that depends on silence. Attention may still be present, affection may still be performed, but safety is absent, and without emotional safety, there is no love. There is only performance. Emotional availability is another measure. A person who offers attention but avoids vulnerability is not building a connection. They are maintaining influence. When someone listens without ever revealing, when they compliment without ever committing, when they touch without ever supporting, they are not loving. They are participating. Participation is not presence. It is interaction without investment. Love shows up through behavior, not just through words. When someone is emotionally invested, they act with consistency. They respect your boundaries. They acknowledge your emotions. They make space for your complexity. Attention does not require this. It only requires timing. Many people know when to say the right thing. Fewer people stay when things become uncomfortable. Attention is often skilled. Love is patient. You can also examine the aftermath of conflict. When disagreements occur, love seeks resolution. It seeks understanding. It does not punish with silence or distance. It does not withdraw affection to regain control. If conflict results in emotional abandonment, that abandonment is a clear sign that the connection was never emotionally rooted. It was conditional, transactional, and designed to collapse under pressure. One of the most painful realizations comes when someone understands that they were not loved for who they are, but for how they responded to attention. This realization does not appear sudden. It emerges slowly, in the quiet moments when they notice that their needs are not being met, their emotions are not being held, and their value is not being seen. They remember being noticed, not being understood. They remember being praised, not being known. That distinction is not small. It is the boundary between illusion and intimacy. People often say they miss someone, when what they truly miss is how they felt when that person was paying attention. That feeling was not love. It was recognition, but recognition from someone who does not value you is not a gift. It is a mirror. It reflects your emotional hunger. not their emotional depth. You can write down one moment in your life when you believed someone loved you, only to later discover they did not stay, they did not care, or they never knew who you really were. That memory is not shameful, it is education. It shows how easily attention can mask as love, and how deeply the mind wants to believe that being seen is enough. But being seen is not the same as being held, and being held is not the same as being healed. Love holds and heals while attention can only seize. Emotional awakening does not begin with hope. It begins with disillusionment. When the mind starts to detach from false beliefs, it experiences discomfort. That discomfort is necessary. It signals that an internal structure, once believed to be real, no longer holds truth. Most people resist this moment. They want to return to comfort. They want to find a way to make the illusion work. But illusions do not transform. They only delay reality. The decision to stop chasing attention and to seek real love begins with accepting what is absent. Dark psychology teaches that illusions persist, not because they are convincing, but because they are repeated. A lie heard often enough becomes believable. When someone is raised in an environment where affection is conditional, where approval is earned, and where love is rarely demonstrated, the brain adapts. It does not seek authenticity. It seeks familiarity. That familiarity becomes the standard. If emotional inconsistency is what you grew up with, you will find it difficult to trust stability. Stability may feel boring. It may feel suspicious. This is not a personality flaw. It is a neurological adaptation to an unpredictable emotional environment. To awaken from this pattern, one must first recognize how their own nervous system responds to attention. Ask yourself whether your body feels calm or excited when someone engages with you. Then ask whether that excitement is based on safety or on unpredictability. Real love creates calm, it creates clarity, it allows your body to rest. The love that triggers anxiety, desperation, or obsession is not grounded, it is reactive. It does not nourish, it agitates. Healing begins when a person becomes emotionally literate. Emotional literacy is the ability to distinguish between affection and investment, between stimulation and connection, between words and actions. Most people are fluent in romantic language, but illiterate in relational truth. They know how to describe feelings, but not how to evaluate behavior. This creates a gap between what they feel and what they tolerate. Emotional awakening fills that gap with observation. Start observing patterns. Does the person who gives you attention also show accountability? Do they remain during moments of emotional challenge? Do they respect your boundaries even when it does not benefit them? If the answer is no, then what you are receiving is not love. It is conditional validation. Validation can make you feel good, but it cannot make you feel safe. And without safety, love cannot exist. Choosing real love means choosing people who are emotionally available, not emotionally intense. Emotional intensity often comes from unprocessed trauma. It burns fast, it impresses, but it rarely sustains. Emotional availability is quieter. It involves showing up when it is inconvenient. It involves listening without trying to win. It involves being present without needing to be praised. Many individuals reject emotional availability because it does not produce the emotional high they have become addicted to. They mistake calm for emptiness. But calm is not emptiness. It is alignment. It is the nervous system recognizing safety. If you are only attracted to people who activate your anxiety, then anxiety has become your compass. That compass will not lead you to love. It will lead you to repetition. Awareness also involves confronting internal narratives. If you believe you must earn love, you will seek people who make you prove your worth. If you believe you are not enough on your own, you will gravitate toward those who offer attention as a reward for compliance. These beliefs are not romantic. They are damaging. They prevent you from receiving love that does not demand a performance. To change these patterns, you must build emotional tolerance. Learn to tolerate silence. Learn to tolerate not being seen. Learn to tolerate the absence of attention. without assuming it means the absence of value. The more you can exist without needing to be noticed, the more you can recognize who sees you clearly. Emotional freedom begins when you stop asking, "Did they notice me?" and start asking, "Do they understand me?" The person who understands you will not manipulate your need to be seen. They will not use attention as a tool. They will not disappear when you become complex. They will remain, not to fix you, but to walk beside you while you heal. Choosing real love is not about finding someone who gives you more attention. It is about finding someone whose attention is backed by presence, honesty, and care. This cannot be rushed. It cannot be demanded. It must be earned, mutually, through time and truth. That truth may not always feel exciting, but it will feel solid. And in a world built on simulation, solid is rare. If you continue to chase the feeling that once made you feel alive, you will miss the love that could help you stay alive. The feeling of being noticed is temporary. The experience of being emotionally safe is transformative. One ends when the attention fades. The other begins when the illusion ends. There comes a point in every psychological journey where explanation no longer heals, and only a decision can. You now understand how easily the brain confuses attention with love. You see how emotional hunger reshapes perception, how manipulation disguises itself as affection, and how the systems that shape your world, including culture, technology, and memory, reinforce illusions that feel emotionally true. At this point, continuing to believe the illusion is not an accident. It becomes a conscious act. Dark psychology is not intended to instill fear. It is designed to reveal what you have been trained not to notice. It forces you to confront patterns that have lived beneath your awareness, patterns that shaped how you bonded with others, how you gave yourself away, how you waited for validation, and how you suffered when it did not come. These are not abstract concepts. They are deeply embedded emotional maps, formed in your earliest relationships, repeated in adulthood, and exploited by those who understand how to use attention as a tool of control. There is no checklist for real love. No formula will guarantee safety, but you can find clarity. That clarity does not come from analyzing others. It comes from being willing to observe yourself honestly. When you stop chasing people who make you feel emotionally activated, and instead begin to notice the ones who help you feel calm and whole, the entire pattern begins to shift. That shift will not happen instantly. It will not be comfortable, but it will be irreversible. You now carry a difficult question within you. Will you continue to let your value be defined by those who notice you? Or will you begin to seek a connection that holds you even when you are no longer performing? This is not a hypothetical reflection. It is a real decision that must be made when you are alone with your thoughts, when the attention is gone, when the noise is silent, and when the urge to return to the familiar becomes strong. In that moment, your next choice will define what kind of love you are willing to accept. If this message has reached a part of you that has remained unseen for too long, do not let it dissolve into forgettable content. Let it disturb something that needed to wake up. Let it become a mirror you can no longer turn away from. If you have ever mistaken attention for love, you are not broken. You are simply stepping into awareness. That awareness is not an end. It is the beginning of a different way of relating to others and to yourself. Share this with someone who still believes the lie you just unlearned. Share it with someone who is trapped in the cycle you have begun to escape. If you are ready to uncover what most people spend their lives avoiding, then subscribe. This is not entertainment, it is truth, delivered through a voice most people try to silence. But now that you have heard it, you can no longer unhear it. The next time someone gives you attention, pause long enough to ask yourself whether what you feel is love, or only the comfort of being seen by someone who never truly intended to stay.